So, hello and welcome to our next community call and Ask Me Anything session. Our topic this week is blind signatures, which I personally have no idea what they are, but they seem super interesting. Suggested by Michael. I know that Adam and Maddie are working on it, and it's an improvement to privacy. That's all I know. And I want to learn more. I want to ask questions. So we have another use case of BrightID. Does it have to do with the structure of BrightID and how it works, or is it something that is on top of BrightID?
Yes, it has to do with this. Well, so I would say that it's a structural improvement to the protocol. It makes it simpler. It removes a lot of the complexity that we were dealing with to keep things private, and it's more private and easier for us than what we were doing before. So so we like it. It's a nice improvement. Um, yeah, it means that we have to keep track of less data on the node side, on the BrightID node side. But the goal of it is, it's the same as the goal that we had before, and we were doing a pretty good job with it. The goal is that you don't want unwanted there to be this unwanted linkage if you have accounts in different systems or different apps. No one should know, not even BrightID nodes should be able to link you between your different apps by your BrightID. So you shouldn't be able to say, okay, this user identified with this identifier in this platform is also this user identified by this identifier in this platform or in this app. So an example is a lot of apps want to use Ethereum addresses as the identifier. And luckily, it's really easy to make a new Ethereum address. And the way that we handle it, the way that we were handling it is you could, if you wanted to protect against the unwanted linkage, just create a new Ethereum address for each app and link it. There's a linking phase where you link an outside identifier, unique identifier to your BrightID unique identifier, and then the apps always reference you by that. And then in the old way, the BrightID nodes had to keep track of those identifiers, and so they could link them all together. So in other words, they could like look in their database and see, okay, well, this BrightID user is using this Ethereum address and this Ethereum address and this Ethereum address for these different things. And so that's, to us, that's too much. At least the apps don't know that, but that's still too much information for the node operator to use. And so what we were recommending in the past is like use a one-time, like a throwaway Ethereum address that you only use for that app. But blind signatures are even better, because with a blind signature, the node doesn't have to keep track of anything. What a blind signature is, it allows the node to sign something without knowing what it's signing. So you can say, hey, here I am. You know me in your graph, but I want you to sign this identifier that I've chosen to use for this application. I'm not going to tell you what it is, but you sign it, and then you can go back and take that identifier, that signed identifier, as proof that you're verified, and give it back to the app. So you can tell the app, this is the identifier I'm using. Look, the BrightID node signed it. I'm verified. The BrightID node never even sees it, never has to store it, never does anything. So except apply the signature. So the physical analogy for this is like, let's say that you were voting, and you have so you want an authority, like a government authority, to certify that you're eligible to vote without looking at your vote. So what you can do is you can put your put your vote inside an envelope, like your vote inside an envelope that's lined with carbon paper, which if you sign it, it like transfers the signature onto whatever's underneath it. So you have an envelope that's lined with that. You put your vote inside it, send it to the person along with some credentials that or whatever they need to know that you are who you say you are. Send that out to the authority that's going to determine your eligibility. They sign the outside of the envelope and then put it in another envelope and mail it back to you. And then now you have a signed ballot and they never saw what it was. You can check to make sure that they never looked inside it. So that's like the physical analog of what's happening here. So yeah, it makes our lives simpler and it makes things more private. So I think it's an all-around win to upgrade to using those. And so we're right in the middle of it. I think we have most of it figured out, how it's going to work. So we're just right in the middle of implementing it. It's part of our roadmap for this quarter. So that's it. Now, what do you guys want to talk about?
That's all, right?
That's it. I mean, that's all there
Yeah.
is. If you want me to show you if some of that didn't make sense and you want me to show you like a diagram of it or something like that.
When live, sir, when live.
When live?
When eco.
Oh yeah. I
When
mean,
this
sometime
live.
I would say, I don't know, like sometime next month, probably. We're getting close. I mean, we started, it's going to be Node version 6 that has it.
And
Yeah.
Which party decides whether you're using a blind signature or not?
You have to use a blind signature. Okay. So I see. That's a more general question.
Is it the node? Is it the app? Is it the user?
Right. The node, the node decides that it's going to be willing to sign a blind signature. That's the main thing. Like nodes know how to sign things. They have signing keys. They can sign things. And so the node looks at this blind signature, this blind thing, this thing that it can't read, that you're saying, please sign this, and it decides whether it wants to sign that or not. Now we're using something that's a little bit more advanced called partially blind signatures. So there's some, and let's see, let me tell you the name of the authors of the paper. Okay, there's a paper called Provably Secure Partially Blind Signatures by Masayaki Abe and Tatsuaki Okamoto. And that's, we're following their, right now we're following the algorithm laid out in the protocol laid out in their paper exactly. The protocol is very clearly written in there. So if you want to look up that paper, you can find the protocol. But basically, so let's say that you have some information that's not blinded, some information that is blinded. Let's say the information that's not blinded is the name of an app, or you could think of the name of a context if it's a bunch of apps using the same context. So it's the name of an app, your an expiration date if there is one, and the verification that it's using, because there's different verification levels in BrightID. So those three things would not be blinded. Then the things that would be blinded are your Ethereum address or whatever other identifiers you're using, and any other, that's usually enough right there of what needs to be blinded. So then you send the whole thing over, and so the app, or sorry, the BrightID node sees, okay, here's the app that they want, here's the expiration date, and here's the verification level. It checks the verification level, make sure you have it, checks the app and the expiration date to make sure that you haven't requested this type of signature before. If you request it and you lose it, that's like bad news for you. You just have to wait for the next expiration. but the nodes actually in our current, the way we're implementing now, the nodes will store a copy. So you can just keep getting a copy of the signature that it signed. So then it checks the stuff that's not blinded, says, okay, that's good, looks good. They have, there's no like attack that they can do because we haven't already signed this for them. And then it's signed, and then it will sign it for you. So you get at most one signature with the revealed, the known unblind data, and then the blind data, the node never sees it. And you can even do something, you can even take that signature, unblind it. You always have to unblind it to prove that that they signed the thing that you wanted, that they signed that unique identifier that you wanted. But you can even take that unblinded signature and give it back to the node again and say, look, here's proof that you can anonymously give it back to them and say, look, here's proof that I being, it won't see your BrightID this time. This time it just sees you by that new identifier. You can say, look, here's proof that you said before that I am verified with this context ID, and you don't tell them what your BrightID is at that point. And then the node can do something else with it. Like the node could say, okay, I'm gonna upload this to a smart contract and say, and add this Ethereum address that you just showed me to a smart contract. And so it's really interesting that way, because you can use the same authority, and it's like their right hand doesn't know what their left hand just did. So it's kind of, yeah, it's really nice. It makes it easier. We don't have to store as many things and keep track of as many things. We do have to be careful about kind of like timing attacks, where you send out the same request to like 100 different nodes, and they all sign it because they haven't coordinated with each other. So what you can do with that is you have like an M of N, like a threshold signature or something like that. So you can say, like the app can say, before we consider this valid, like these are the 5 nodes we trust to do this signing, and you need to get 3 of them or something like that. And if you do something like that, then you can't do that sort of attack where you just like blast out the request and they don't have time to coordinate to see how they, in fact, they don't even have to coordinate with each other really, other than well, it depends on how you do the threshold signature, but they may not even need to coordinate with each other. So anyways, yeah, so that's how we're doing it.
Yeah, I wanted to ask on the same note that someone posed the question of users' decisions in BrightID. Do you think that we can have it like an option for users that are selecting the behavior of the apps? Is it going to be a blind signature or not, or it doesn't matter for the user?
User doesn't even see it. Like a bunch of stuff right now in BrightID gets signed. You sign things, like when you make a connection, you're signing something, and the app just does it for you. So it'll be the same way. The app will handle these blind signatures. You don't have to know whether they're blind or not, but you can just take comfort in knowing that the node is getting.
As a user, don't I care whether it's blind or not?
Yes, you would prefer that it's blind, which is why we're doing blinded signatures.
Right. So like I need to be told like, hey, this one's not blind.
The nodes can just not accept any. They can just refuse to sign something that's not blind, which is what they'll do. So the nodes are going to switch to only signing.
Okay, so it's going to be. You think it's going to be an only blind?
Yeah.
Only the old legacy ones that already happened will.
So I think what will happen is the old ones, like old verifications, will expire at some point. It's up to the app. Like if you wanted to have verifications that never expire and someone already did it, then yeah, you can keep the old ones. You can keep the old unblinded ones. But if you are, if you expect those verifications to expire at some point, and I think it's good, and so maybe you could use this as an opportunity to let those old verifications expire and just have everyone re-verify. But it depends on your app, because maybe you don't care enough to do that. You can still keep the old, because basically if you took the old verification and you just made a note of it in your app, you're like, okay, yeah, this person was the person with this identifier was verified. Then you're done. You never have to deal with the nodes again if there is no such thing as an expiration. But if you wanted to make those old style ones that you already checked and are done with, if you wanted to make those expire and then start using the blind ones and start using expiration dates. The nice thing about expiration dates is if, I mean, some apps are already doing this. There are, like, if you look at the faucets, typically they'll have a registration period. And then, so you register and then you claim, and then there'll be another registration period. You have to register again. And the reason they do that is because that way you can't use something that's out of date. Like, let's say that you were verified and now the verification required is stronger. You're not permanently verified. Your verification expires. Or let's say that you got flagged a bunch of times and now you lost your verification, or you died or something like that. So this is, it's like to keep up to date, the verifications expire. So I think that's healthy for the verifications to expire. And so that's why we allow an unblinded verification date. That was actually the motivation for partially blinded signatures, was to allow an expiration date on a signature. So
Is there
sounds like some
any
extra steps. This will make the system slower, someone asked. No, it won't make the system slower. It's still just signing something. Actually, there are as far as like, so there is a couple of interactions. So it's like it's a 3-step thing instead of a 1-step thing, but it's not going to be noticeably slower. It's gonna happen basically instantly from a user's perspective. Yeah, I think it does add some extra processing on the node, extra processing, but less extra processing in some places, but less processing in other places. Because so at the verification time, I think it will it's a few more steps to process the verification. But then at the time when you're looking up things, there's less data, there's less things to send around. You don't have to send around things to other nodes. You don't have to manage these intermediate identifiers. And so I mean, it actually makes things less complex on that part. So I think overall it's actually going to speed things up. And yeah, I think any slowdown in the verification piece, like the very first part where you're doing the signatures, is just going to be not going to be noticeable.
I want to
So,
ask
so
if
really the user should not notice anything. It's not, the user's not going to notice anything. Their client is going to handle this for them. It's going to do this, just kind of like when you SSH into something, or when you visit a website using a secure socket layer. Like, there's a whole bunch of handshaking and other stuff like that going on. But you just load, as far as you're concerned, you just load the page. So yeah, there are going to be some like handshake steps and like some back and forth interactive steps, but I mean, it's all transparent to the user, or opaque to the user. Yes, Paslar, you started to say something.
is okay. I asked a question in the chat as well. Is there any reason we can imagine an app preferring non-blind signatures? If so, why are we even like, yeah, thinking about having that option?
that we're not thinking about having that option, and there is no reason.
Mhm.
Yeah, in
Well,
fact, I mean,
hold on, Adam,
basically it's the
there's
nodes.
certainly a reason.
Oh, there's a reason if they want to be a bad actor.
Well, right, a bad actor, or just, I mean, Facebook hoovers up as much information as they possibly can. And I don't know
Yeah.
that I'd call them a bad actor, but they're trying to like monetize.
Right. Right. And so basically this is us cracking down on that and saying we're not going to sign anything that has an exposed identifier. We're not going to let you do that. And that, so we're basically saying this is the BrightID node protocol. We protect our users' privacy by not looking at that identifier. Now someone could set up their own like pseudo BrightID system where it's like, okay, only use this node and this node is running different software. But then we can kind of blow the whistle on them. We can't stop them from doing that. I mean, BrightID is open source and the graph is open source. So you can be a node operator and run slightly different software, and you can have your own front end and everything like that. And we can't stop that. But what we can do is we can just alert users, like we as BrightID. Maybe that will be part of our role and responsibility in the future as the BrightID community, is just to say, hey, like, just be aware this app is using BrightID in a non-standard way. It's not using blind signatures. It's just using its own set of nodes, and they are getting data that from you that you would normally be protected from. And so, and then other apps could choose not to use those nodes so that there's none of that unwanted linkage. Users could even choose not to use those applications if they find out, hey, they're storing more data about me than I want. Like they're actually linking the BrightID to my profile in this app, and I don't want that. So I don't want to use this app anymore. Because if you have a bunch of apps doing that, then you can link them all together, which is exactly what we're trying to avoid. So we're trying to avoid Google knowing who you are on Twitter, and Twitter knowing who you are in Google, and et cetera, et cetera. That's what we're trying to avoid with this. Any reason? Okay, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, so Polly had a couple questions back
Okay.
that I'm curious about as well, about like blind signatures potentially creating more security risks for those, like for different bad actors, because like using on-chain data, you can kind of suss out some bad actors based on their Ethereum address. Like, there's this group of Ethereum addresses that claim from the faucet and always send to this same address or something like that, which kind of may be indicative of some sort of attack. So like, does this protect that kind of attack and potentially any other attacks?
Yeah, so maybe I did a bad job of explaining blind signatures, but the app gets back the ID. So what the app receives looks almost identical to what the app receives now. So the app receives a signed verification with the identifier in plain text. The difference is the node does not receive that. The BrightID node does not get that anymore. So the app's still going to see the Ethereum address. So they can protect in the same ways that they've already been protected.
And Jordan, it was already true that the app didn't get your BrightID, but there was a way that the node was getting your BrightID, and they were getting your unique identifier from the app. And maybe they could do something with those.
If you put those two pieces, so you still had to put those two pieces together. So we had a layer of protection, this like intermediate ID, but you could still put the two pieces together if you had control of both those pieces. So if you were running a node, so let's say you were running an app and you were running a node, you could put those two pieces together and make that connection. But now you can't. But you still will get that as the app. You'll still get, if you were just running an app and you weren't running a node, you'll get all the same information that you always did.
So you could then flag an account, a BrightID identifier based on an Ethereum address that you deem as suspicious.
you you still can't do that. You can't even do that right now. So we've thought about, that's an interesting question. So let's go into that. So right now we have a notion of flagging like a user to user, and users have each other's BrightIDs. Apps don't have BrightIDs. Apps have what we call context IDs, or I think in the future we'll call them app IDs, but whatever. It's this other identifier that exists in another context. So that's what apps have. Now that's an interesting question, which I've also thought about, is should an app be able to flag, and should that have meaning? So right now we don't have that set up, and there's certainly no way to translate that flag into a, well, let's see. I'm trying to think. Yeah, I don't know. That's an interesting question, because I think so I'm trying to think of like, would so would that translate, or could you get that information back to, so that the anti-Sybil algorithms could then view it and do something with it? Could
So,
you get that
Adam,
back?
I'll give you an example. The way you used to connect to Ideal Money was to make a regular BrightID connection with
Yeah.
Ideal Money. So Ideal Money
Yeah.
certainly could have rated you that way.
Yeah, and so
I know
if
we
you,
didn't like that, but
yeah, we don't like that, and we don't like apps knowing your BrightID, and because of that, we also do, I mean, we already don't, we don't really allow that right now, even without the blind signatures, but with blind signatures, it becomes even more strict. So there's, if you want to flag someone by their Ethereum address, let's think about what you're saying when you do that. You're saying, I want to flag them in my, so, because let's say that these are unique. We talked about before how you can protect yourself from unwanted linkage by just making a new Ethereum address, which BrightID totally allows you to do. So let's say for every app that I'm using in BrightID, I make a new Ethereum address. And let's say that let's say that I become verified with 10 different BrightIDs. So I've got 10 different Sybils that I've managed to get verified in BrightID. I have 10 new Ethereum addresses that I don't use anywhere else. So if the app says, okay, we've identified a Sybil attack here, these 10 Ethereum addresses are bad, then what it wants to do, I think what it really wants to do when it says I want to flag these Ethereum addresses, is it's saying, I want to share this data with other apps. I want other apps to know about this bad actor. I already know. I already know this is a bad actor. I can take the steps in my app to block them from service or whatever. But I want to like disqualify these accounts, not just in my app, but in other apps. So I want to, basically you're saying that I want to link. You want to make that link. So that's, I mean, it's interesting. And it makes sense that you would want to do that you would want to alert the other apps. And if you could just do it with just the flag, so that you're not like saying anything else about this user other than like, this is their flag, like you don't share any other profile information about them, then that, I think that could be a helpful warning system. So that's interesting. Like, how would we design that? I don't know. That's an interesting question, but it would be helpful. Maybe Maddie has an idea while he's been listening to this, like how you could design an alert system that allows apps to share with other apps what they know about. Just the flag part, just the reporting part, reporting a bad user and sharing that information with another app without sharing their profile. Yes.
I have
Go
an
ahead.
idea.
Go ahead.
So um, I think this would be something like uh, like the next layer up concern, like maybe DIDs could be used. Um, so DIDs could there would have to be some kind of social consensus where users DIDs could store uh, flagging data or something. So I would think something like this would not be a concern of BrightID, because BrightID concern is just minimal, just civil resistance and proof of being a unique human, and that's about it. But something like this probably would be uh, better designed next layer up, like a reputation system, right? So DIDs are perfect for that. But I'm not sure exactly how the mechanisms would work. But I think there is something uh, in that layer.
So maybe Polly could give us a little bit more context on what they're talking about with Rarefy specifically. But I think from what I gathered from what you said, Adam, is that an app already would have the ability to block an address that they deem to be a Sybil right now, right? And the only question is whether or not we can communicate that, or whether an app can communicate that to other apps. Which, if I understand what is you guys are trying to build with Aura, is that would be something along those lines where an app can act as a player in that game, where they can stake a certain amount of funds, saying like, this, we believe this person is a bad actor, and that will prove out over time. Does that make sense there?
So yeah, but the problem that we're dealing with here is that our reporting system is based around connections between users, and not users within an app. So the app knows its users by, it's got its own set of internal identifiers that it knows its users by. Could be an Ethereum address, could be a unique identifier that it assigns to its users, like a user ID or whatever. So that's how it knows its users. It doesn't know their BrightIDs. And so if it wants to tell the world, or like tell Aura or tell BrightID or tell another app, hey, look, I found a bad actor in my system, they would love to know the BrightID of that person so that they could tell the whole world, like, this is a bad actor, don't trust them. But for these privacy reasons, they don't have that option. They just can't, like, they can't find the person by that identifier. They can, if they, like, if some other user, if there's some other user who's using that app that made a connection with that person, now you have a way of like rating that person and reporting them in BrightID. But until you have that, you just don't have a way to find it. And so I think what would be cool is if you had a way to say, okay, I'm hello, BrightID node operator, I'm sharing this information with you about this user with this context ID, and I'm not sharing anything other than the fact that that I think that they're a bad actor. That's the only thing I'm sharing. So I'm not, or a good actor. I mean, I guess you could go both ways. Like bad actor, good actor. I'm not sharing any other information about this person in my system. And then the BrightID node looks at it and says, "Yep, you're not sharing any other information. So I will accept this." So, but I don't Like I can't think of how to do that without without the risk of them sharing too much.
Well, then another way of potentially doing it would be which I think might be the vision of BrightID, is for apps to be running their own nodes, which then might use their own algorithms. And then they can say, like, this is my source of truth. And I might rely on, like, as a secondary source of truth, the general BrightID algorithm, but I could overwrite that based off of my own rules. And I'm determining that this one is going to be excluded.
Yep. Again, when you put on the BrightID node hat, you don't know anything about app identifiers. So it's basically those two worlds are kept separate, like the app identifiers and the BrightID like person identifiers. So who you are in BrightID and who you are in an app is kept completely separate. So that's so the interesting question then, is there a way to like break through that barrier in a mitigated way that just says like I only want this information is okay. It's okay to break through that barrier with just this information, like just this report, like this subjective report that I have on this user. I think that they're a bad actor. I think that they're good. Like me as the app, not me as a person, because we already have me as a person. We already have that capability. I as a person can rate other people, but I as an app, like speaking for the app, I don't yet have that capability, but it's really interesting. I can see why it's potentially useful, like for the app to have an opinion about someone.
Yeah, for sure. So if I could chime in here for a sec, so I can give a little bit more context about the situation. So we're running Rarify apps, and that's a distributed claiming system that lets anybody claim a share every day of Bitcoin, basically. And so what we discovered is there's a couple of addresses that we can clearly see on the blockchain that are basically making multi-claims and then sending it to one single account. So we can therefore make the correlation that these addresses are basically one identity, and they're basically making more than one claim. So on that level, they're abusing the system. They're also abusing the Honey side too. Honey has a similar claiming system, and it's all on the blockchain. So we know their addresses. We know the addresses that are, bad actors here. But then again, we don't really have a way to then cross the bridge to the BrightID user side to then act, basically figure out who they are, so we can actually, make them suspicious, essentially, so we can lower their reputation somehow. So that's the issue there.
Yep, got it. Maddie has something to say. I was just going to say, do you have something? He does.
به طور خاص فکر می‌کنم صدای من میاد. Can you hear me? من فکر می‌کنم BrightID الان داره یک زیرساخت ایجاد میکنه برای مسئله یونیک آیدنتیتی و مسئله پرایوسی داخل این جایگاه درست مسئله پرایوسی رو داخل این زیرساخت دادن اهمیت خیلی زیادی داره.
So Maddie says he thinks that BrightID right now is creating an infrastructure for the private identity.
Unique identity.
Unique identity, as he said.
و پرایوسی اینجا مسئله خیلی مهمیه داخل این یعنی جایگاه پرایوسی داخل این زیرساخت ما داریم درست می‌کنیم خیلی جایگاه مهمیه.
And in this infrastructure, the privacy of the identity is vital. It's super important for the infrastructure to work.
این مسئله اپلیکیشن که اپلیکیشن ها بخوان فلگ کنن یا ریپورت کنن یک یوزر رو، من فکر میکنم تو نگاه سیستماتیک به موضوع، اگر اپلیکیشن ها در واقع راه حلی دارن برای تشخیص یونیکنس و اینکه مشکوک بشن به یک فرد، چرا دارن از برایت آیدی استفاده میکنن؟ یعنی من فکر کنم اصلا اینجا داره مسئله برعکس مطرح میشه.
And he says if these applications are able to flag users for themselves and figure out bad actors and using them in a systematic view, Maddie is posing the question that why are they even using BrightID if they are able to identify bad actors themselves? It's like we are looking at this like backwards.
من فکر میکنم این موضوعی که الان به طور خاص در هانی پیش اومده، من خودم دقیقا آشنایی دارم باهاش، قبلا حالا بحثش کردم، مطرح کردم این رو، اینکه توالی چیزها، توالی کلیم کردن های یک سری آدرس ها بخواد به عنوان اینکه اینها بد اکتور هستن یا داپلیکیت اکاونت هستن استفاده بشه، من یعنی بهینه اطلاع دارم که اینجوری نیست. یعنی برعکس اون کسایی که دارن یه تعداد زیادی اکاونت شما میبینید که تو سیستم وان هایپ دارن پشت سر هم کلیم میکنن، این اصلا به این معنی نیست که اینها داپلیکیت اکاونت هستن یا بد اکتور هستن، بلکه به این معنی هست که اینها دارن اون صدی که به نام کلیم کردن با یو آی هست و اومدن با یک اسکریپت از پیش پاشون برداشتن و کارو ساده کردن، اما کاملا تمام چیزایی که دارن این کارو انجام، یعنی دارن به این توالی چیز میکنن، اینا همه یونیک آیدنتیتی هستن.
و خانواده هایی که شاید دارن برای مثلا پدر و مادر
یا دوستانی.
Maddie says the way that the Polisan just described the way he's identifying these the bad actors. Maddie knows lots of people who are the good actors. They for the one hive faucet at least, and what they are doing is that they're not claiming each time with the single like claim the action. What they are doing is they are using scripts so they can claim with a button for all their family and friends. And that's another thing to consider, that lots of people, myself one of them, is claiming for their like the brothers and sisters and like their family that are not crypto savvy. Maybe they have their BrightID accounts. They are unique. They are real. And they register once with that the unique BrightID account, and then they are claiming for them. And once in a while, they forward all those assets that they have claimed to one single account because they want to use that to maybe cash out. So you need to consider that as well. But Maddie is continuing.
یه نکته خیلی مهمی که میخوام بهش اشاره کنم اینه که تشخیص یونیکنس اپروچ‌های مختلفی ممکنه براش در واقع اتخاذ بشه. یکی از اون اپروچ‌ها تکیه بر ارتباطات سوشال هست در مقایسه با سایر روش‌ها. برایت آیدی دغدغه‌اش تکیه بر این ارتباطات سوشال هست و اینکه فلگینگ ما مبتنی بر کسی که شما رو میشناسه میتونه فلگ بکنه، با شما کانکشن داره میتونه فلگ بکنه. این به این خاطر هست که تکیه برایت آیدی، اصلا روش برایت آیدی برای تشخیص یونیکنس چیز هست. اما اون روش‌هایی که الان شما دارید ساجست میدید برای اپلیکیشن ها، اصلا اونها یه روش‌های دیگه هست. ممکنه سیستم‌های موازی با برایت آیدی اصلا وجود داشته باشه، اپلیکیشن ها بخوان استفاده بکنن برای در واقع یونیکنس، اما اون روش‌ها مثل اینکه ما تشخیص بدیم، مثلا بات ها رو تشخیص بدیم از مثلا توالی کلیم ها، روش به شدت سستی هست. از حداقل برداشت من که سالا دارم توی موضوع کار میکنم، روش به شدت سستی و قابل چیزی هست و قابل اتکی باز هست. اما اپلیکیشن ها مختارن که بخوان از این روش ها هم استفاده بکنن. اما برایت آیدی موضوع فلگینگش موضوعی نیست که مثلا با توالی مثلا چیزا بشه تشخیص داد، با رابطه سوشال میشه تشخیص داد و این امکان هم فراهم هست داخل برایت آیدی.
That was a lot. That was, yeah. But Maddie says, okay, we can have different approaches for detecting the uniqueness of accounts. BrightID is taking the approach of social relationships or social relations. That's what BrightID is based on. So the uniqueness is being detected based on social relationships, and in the same manner, flagging users as bad behavior, as bad actors, needs to be social, needs to be from people who might know you or might know that you are behaving badly, because it's the social approach. Now, flagging users based on like the claiming regulations or the claiming periods that are doing the same way that Polisson that just described could be another approach. But Maddie says, based on the experience that he has so far with all these years doing research on all these different approaches, is not a solid the approach to detecting bots.
So having listened to this conversation just now, I had some ideas. So one thing that I would say, and this speaks to what Madi and Polly were just saying, is if you from like some other behavior that is external to BrightID, like maybe like siphoning money into one account or something like that from multiple accounts. If you see some suspicious behavior, I think the first thing, if you want to share that behavior, first of all, the application is can say that's not allowed. That's within their realm to do that. If they want to alert other apps, I think the maybe the best way, the first best step, rather than like trying to flag the users that did it, is to say, hey, we notice this behavior. Do you notice this behavior? If you do, you might want to like look out for this behavior, because this is something we notice. Like just make it known, like that's to similar apps, that they should be looking for this type of behavior. That's the first step. And then I thought of a way for apps to distinguish between people who are doing what they consider bad behavior and not, and have that go back and reflect in the BrightID app or in the BrightID graph. And the way you can do that is, so there's an article that I wrote in the forum about importing trust. So apps themselves can learn things about their users that, and this is an example of it potentially, although we did hear some counter arguments about why that might not actually be a Sybil attack. But let's say that a user does something to make themselves very trustworthy within a system or application, then that application can certify that on behalf of the user, and they can sign something that can then get anonymously imported back into BrightID. So instead of taking the negative approach, if we take the positive approach, if we say, okay, rather than trying to report all the bad actors, let's take all the good actors who aren't doing the bad behavior, and let's give them, let's like automatically sign something for them that allows them to, like if you've gone a year without, engaging in this behavior that we flagged as bad, then you get this signature from us that says so, that basically says, hey, in the last year, this has been a good actor in our application. So we're signing something that says it. Then they can take that into the BrightID node and import that. And they can also do it anonymously. So then they get this boost that way, saying, okay, cool, I get this little boost to my, it would probably not be to their actual like verification, but more to the, if you read the article, it talks about seeding trust. So it boosts them it boosts the trust in that area, so that the people that they're connected to then get that trust. So that's how you destroy Sybil attacks. Is the Sybil regions don't get to import this trust, but the honest regions do get to import this trust. So if someone's connecting to a bunch of their Sybils, they just lack all this trust that they could be importing from all these different apps and all these different places. But an honest user that's doing a good job gets to import all this trust from all these different places. And so their connections, who are actually their family members, like real people, will get this trust. So that I think would be the ideal method, and that does preserve privacy. And that's kind of what we're going for in the long run anyway is we're moving away from seeds being kind of like this hierarchical process where someone has to like decide who's like there's some like, I won't say central because it's not really central, but there's like this hierarchical body that decides who should be the trusted seeds, and they get the seed power. And this is kind of how it works now, because you have to have seeds in the graph. You have to have the pre-selected sources of trust. But moving away from that into sort of this even more decentralized way of doing it, where it's these applications that know something about the user, that have monitored the user, and it could be a faucet application that knows something, or it could be in that paper I identified like some different sources that I thought could be highly trustworthy. One is like if you prove to an application somewhere that you're eligible to work in a specific country, that normally involves like a lot of like getting to know the person, doing a background check, interviews, those sorts of things. If you've proved that, that is like a big source of trust potentially that you can then anonymously import into the graph. So then it becomes this more organic thing of like all this feedback coming from all these different apps saying this person is honest. They import that into the graph, and now their little region of them and the people around them gets more of this trust. So long-term vision, and I think that can actually work.
I would find that extremely valuable. Everything you described there about, having this sort of decentralized trust, and that can be built in so many other applications, not just their current ones, but futures, some sort of decentralized credit system. That I could see huge demand for that. Yeah, for sure.
That is our long-term vision. Yes. And because we don't, right now, there's like these kind of like central, like quick stop type points of centralization, I guess you could call it. It's like pseudo decentralized. We're moving that direction, but there's still like right now, most people are going to a verification party of some point, of some type. There's these seed communities but like the seed selection process is like slow, and it has to go through like this. There's just one or two seed DAOs that it has to go through, and so this would be something where it's just like we push that responsibility to the edges, and it's just like harvesting that trust from wherever it can. I think that's a much better approach. So that's our long-term goal. And you should just be connecting to people that you already know. Like you shouldn't, in the future, you should not have to go. If you go to one of these BrightID parties, like we've already discussed this a lot. If you go to a BrightID party, it should be to learn how to use BrightID and make some like kind of throwaway connections with some people you don't really know. That should not be the basis for the verification system. That's just like very much a stopgap right now that we're playing with.
Speaking of connecting,
Do it. Speaking of connecting.
Cool, so it's time already.
Yeah, let me, before I stop recording, thank everyone. Thank Polisan, Madid, Adam, and everyone else in Bitsika for a very intriguing conversation from the beginning to the end. It was interesting. Thank you. And I'm going to stop recording now, so you can feel free to turn your cameras on. And we are